So we're going to see, various degrees of preservation, but nice storefronts all through here. I'm particularly intrigued, by the way, this one is done on the corner like this. You really see the nice filigree work here. So obviously this has always been some sort of a corner entrance, not what's there now, but some sort of a corner entrance, which makes sense because you've got the corner entrance there. Even Nelson's had at some point developed a corner entrance. I don't know how long that's been there like that. But a lot of times commercial buildings that were on a corner made full advantage of it by opening the door up to the corner. You see this cast iron. It's a little bit different than what we saw earlier. And I want to call this almost Eastlake. Charles Eastlake was a 19th century English architect who was really tired of all the mass-produced, machine-made stuff, and he called for artists and architects, designers, I hope that was legible, he wanted everybody to go back to earlier, Gothic period ways of designing and creating things, and to have true craftsmanship, to really see how buildings and furniture was made and put together. Well, he did a pattern book and a architectural treatise on all of this, and by the time it got to America with all of our happy-go-lucky progressing across the continent with our iron foundries and steam mills, we took all of that and just corrupted it, and he was not very happy with it, but hey, So a lot of his designs for sort of a neo-Gothic got interpreted into cast iron, which is kind of what I want to call this, because it's not really Italianate, it's very heavy and robust, and has sort of a Gothic-y feel to it. I'm sure that the iron foundry who did that didn't appreciate where it came from, but saw it someplace in the book and they made a pattern, and there you go. I mean, it's a very nice change, all the heavy effect that this gives us, and we'll see some similar takeoffs on that down the street. But again, even though the storefront here has been completely changed, it still works with the relationship to the street. I really like this. It looks like a little golf ball stuck in there. But all of this very, very elaborate detailing. Again, still sort of Eastlakey to me, but much more elaborate than that. And sometimes when you see, you wonder, well, did some of the pieces fall off, or how did so you don't really know. But very nice detailing. Again, we still have the nice storefront. They even have an area where the transom was, which breaks it up a little better. Very narrow area at the bottom, not really a bulkhead, but you still kind of get the three-part division. And the center entrance. We have a lot of issues at times with folks with storefronts wanting to varnish them. The varnish doesn't work really well on an exterior wooden surface. It breaks down, it doesn't hold out the UV rays. Paint's a much better choice. Now certainly doors, they're usually recessed a little more, don't get this kind of a beating, but we have people go to great expense to recreate wooden storefronts and then varnish them, and then within a couple of years they look awful. They should be painted. Storefronts were, I think almost without exception, painted, because paint does what it's supposed to do. Keeps the weather out, keeps the sun out, and preserves and protects it so much better. Let's go back here for a second, look at this brickwork. I know when we go across the street we'll be able to see this a little better. Something happened here. I know half of this building was painted white. This building was built as a single building. Architecturally, you can see across the street, it was a single design, but at some point the ownership changed and they basically drew a line up the middle, painted half, and the other half wasn't painted. Well, that paint's been removed. So I assume that in the process of removing it, they were a little bit too harsh with it, because you can see what has happened here. We've lost some bricks, the mortar has receded. Sometimes this happens just through natural wear and tear, but it looks like to me that something else is going on. You see how dark and sandy color this mortar is? The original mortars usually were essentially whatever the local sand color was. And then as technology progressed, we got more and more Portland cement available, which is very gray or white, and you see more of that in there. A pure Portland cement is not an appropriate thing to use on historic brick masonry, because it is far too hard and will not give as the bricks want to give, and the masonry just, the Portland cement mortar stays like this, and the bricks just crumble to bits. You can use some Portland to consolidate it, particularly on higher elevations and chimneys, but it needs to be in a limited amount. So if you have an historic brick building, you're going to do some selective repointing. By the way, total repointing of a building is usually never needed. You just need to do some selective repointing in the worst spots. But make sure that the mortar mix is the right amount of sand and lime and a little Portland if you need it, and if you can, try to get the color as close to the original as possible. But this is an example of sort of what happens when buildings aren't treated the way they ought to be. They begin to fail.
Wait, what were you saying was one continuous storefront?
One continuous building.
Oh,
this
building,
was building.
building.
This was
Okay,
one
the
building
colors
with
are
a
so
single
different.
ownership.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
the
okay,
storefronts
okay.
are very different.
Okay, but the building.
The building was a single building.
Misunderstood. Thank you.
No, that's okay. The storefronts are very different, and that's something I wondered about because I knew it was built as a single building, and the storefronts are so different. So I wonder what happened. That happens. Again, another example of a stair going to the second floor. I love the pilaster capitals here. You can really see how there's just sort of a pastiche of different elements that they just sort of stacked one up on top of the other and came up with a very elaborate, a very attractive design. This is, again, probably the most elaborate cast iron we've seen on the square. I think this storefront is probably my favorite on the square. It's probably the most intact and probably the best one. You can see the wonderful paneled bulkhead with the raised wooden molding, all the great cast iron work, cast iron threshold, the center recessed entrance. You see the original beadboard there on the ceiling. You see the great two-light transom, the double leaf wooden doors. See the storefront, how the four big pieces of glass are divided up. And that's old glass, a lot of it is. You can see the waves in it, which is something everybody likes. We all hear about the waves in the glass and being old, and yes, that's true, and it does show that way, and I'm not sure exactly, because I've read different takes, if the waves in the glass are due to imperfections in the manufacturing process, or if it's due to age and the effect of gravity, because supposedly, according to some folks, glass is still essentially a fluid, and it's just slowly moving down. I don't know which. I've heard both. But it is true. If you see waves in glass, as we all know, that indicates some age on the glass. One thing I do want to point out, the storefront is beautiful and intact as it ought to be. The interior walls have had the plaster removed. We should never do that. When they built this building, this was a commercial establishment. That brick was never meant to be seen. Therefore, it's not a fine brick. It's not well done. It was intended to be covered with plaster from the very beginning. So we should preserve interior plaster because it's a much truer record of what was there. It's easier to maintain. The mortar is not going to fall out over your floor, leading you to seal the bricks, which could lead to other problems. So if you do it the way people intended, leave the plaster up, it's better for the building. And as we go on down, another great storefront. I like the way they picked this out with the different colors, so you can really appreciate, and they did that there too, but this is a lot more obvious, the different colors, and you really can see another one of our probably Livermore Foundry pilasters with the little rosettes at the top. You see how this in cast iron is very similar to what you've got over here in the wood, so you can kind of see where the paneling idea came from. No transoms, makes me wonder, may not have had any originally, but I kind of wondered.